Perfect.
Okay. Hello, Sam, and hello to all our viewers. My name is David Forde from the library in Ballywaltrim and Breakhead, Wicklow, and we're here as part of Ireland Reads Day to talk with Sam Blake about her thoughts on writing, reading, and her new book actually as well. She'll do a little reading for us later on. So I'm just going to ask Sam some questions, and if people want to join in afterwards to ask a few questions, that's perfectly fine. So thanks everyone for joining, and hello, Sam. So basically, as part of Ireland Reads Day, which is today, can I ask you, Sam, like your thoughts on just reading in general, and why people should read, why people should give over their time to reading?
I think Ireland Reads is one of the most genius initiatives I've ever seen. I just think it's absolutely brilliant. I mean, one of the key things about reading is that it just takes you away from the here and now, doesn't it? And I think that's what we all need at the moment, more so in this lockdown, probably at this stage than any other time. So I'm just adjusting my sound. Reading absolutely takes you away, takes you to a completely different place. And I think within the pages of a book, you have, as a reader, you have confidence in the author that there's going to be resolution to the story and that you're in a safe place and you know what's going to happen. Well, you don't know what's going to happen at the end, but you know that author's going to take you through a journey. And I think one of the things about lockdown is that we don't know what's going to happen at the end. So having that benefit, I suppose, of being in a secure, safe place and distracted from everything else that's going on is a really good thing. And that's what reading brings.
And in terms of your early childhood memories of reading, are there any particular books or authors that stand out for you?
Oh, absolutely. Like all crime writers, I was a massive Enid Blyton fan. So I say all crime writers, I don't know a single one who didn't start off with the famous five and Secret Seven and Nancy Drew. And I remember going into the library at home and finding those, but also the great thing about our library at home, the one I was a member of, is actually really like Ballywaltrim. It was a small local library and had that lovely, the children's section, just not that many shelves. It wasn't that big. It's really cozy and sort of community spirited. Yes. And I remember going along and just being able to browse through the shelves, and I found Joan Aiken, who was an amazing author for me then as a child, and also this amazing, I should have checked this from the last time we talked, this amazing series of stories about horses that were completely captivating, and literally just found those by picking off the shelves. I would go in every week and come out with a massive pile, in the same way my kids did when they were little, going to Ballywaltrim. I have, this is a secret now, but I have myself, my husband, both kids, my parents as well, who actually don't actually live here, registered as members of Ballywaltrim, just to make sure that my kids had enough books, because my eldest particularly would read like 20 books a week, and it just was a fantastic opportunity just to browse and choose and find things that you wouldn't expect.
And it's nice for a library to have a welcoming atmosphere like that, like you described there, that it's not intimidating and people.
Oh, it's so warm. That's what I absolutely love about Ballywaltrim, is that it's you guys know us, you recognise your readers, and we're always greeted when you go in, and I think it's a huge bonus to having somewhere sort of small, because you have turnover of books and there'll always be something new. And because stuff's going out and coming in again, as a reader, you'll always find something new on the shelf. So there's lots there. It's great.
So getting back to writing and reading, can you remember an early experience, Sam, where you realized that like language had a power, and like that might have inspired you to become a writer thereafter?
I think I was always one of these people, because I read so much. I was always one of these people that thought I would write a book. I'm fascinated by story, and one of the books that had a massive influence on me as a child was Elizabeth Goudge's Little White Horse. And when I think of that now, I think I can see Maria Merriweather's bedroom, and I can see the geraniums in the glass house out the back, the pink flowers. And anybody says the word geranium to me, and I get an image.
Just transported.
The glass house in that book, and for somebody to be able to transport you like that, and embed those images so clearly in your head that I don't know how many years later we're talking now, 40 odd more, that it's still so strong. It's just such an incredible talent. And I still adore that book to this day. And I suppose that's something I always wanted to capture. So yeah, definitely words.
And moving into like adulthood these days, is there any particular genre of writing that you like to read, or that you could would you read non-fiction and fiction?
Yeah, I read all sorts. I have a big pile. Do you want me to go through them? Big pile
Sure,
next
why
to me
not?
here of
Why
what I'm
not?
reading at the moment. I tend to have a few books going in different places in the house, and because there are so many wonderful things out there. I don't know. I like to sit down and read one right from beginning to end, but then also I'm dipping in all over the place. So now obviously I'm a crime writer, so I read an awful lot of crime, but I like to go outside of that genre too. So just now I've just finished this one, which is The Godmothers. Can you see that?
Okay.
On it, by Monica McInerney, which is absolutely wonderful. And Monica literally starts off in Melbourne, goes to Edinburgh. We pop into Trim for a bit. It's a page turner. It's effectively women's fiction. Beautiful characters. I just loved it. Really was completely absorbed and taken away. And a lovely, lovely idea. The fact that these two godmothers have this huge influence on the main character. So I absolutely loved that.
Okay.
I've literally just started, because this has just arrived. This is a proof copy of Cecilia Ahern's Freckles. And this is out in September. I'm talking to her this afternoon. I'm doing an interview for the Society of Authors with her. And it's awesome. It really is so good. And it literally gets you straight in. And look, this is an insider thing here. Can you see the edges? Sprayed edges on a proof is like, wow.
Okay, well,
Global
I think we have it on order.
It's so lovely. And like I would be a crime writer, so being hooked into a story quite quickly is important to me, but her characterization and her just amazing. So I'm completely locked into that. And I am also, as you can see, halfway through this book, which is a proof copy again of Jane Casey's new standalone. I think that's coming out in May. Jane Casey writes the Maeve Kerrigan detective series, but she's literally just written a new first standalone. It's all about courts and a barrister, and her husband is a criminal barrister, so she really has got the inside
information. Okay.
Yes, I'm loving that too. I've just started also, I'm a devil, aren't I? This one, Who Took Eden Mulligan, which is by Sharon Dempsey, who's a crime writer from the North. And that's just out with HarperCollins, actually just now. So you can get hold of that now. And you've probably got that on order too. Really loving that. Again, such a confident voice. I think one of the key things as a reader is you want to have that confident voice. So you just go straight into the story and you're there with the characters. So I'm loving that. And then on the non-fiction front, we all bored to tears here, I'm reading this, which is Murder Under the Microscope by Jim Fraser. So I'm actually working on a new, potentially I think a new series maybe at the moment. And I've just finished a standalone for Corvus. So The Dark Room is out now. The new book for Sam Blake will be out in next January, and I've just finished that, and that's gone off to my editor. So in the meantime, I'm having a play around with some crime ideas, which are quite forensic-y. So I'm reading that and getting a real sense of.
Well, that kind of leads to my next question, so Sam. So where do you get your ideas for like a new book? Where does it just come to you overnight, or where do you get your ideas for? Do you jot the ideas down as it comes to you, or how
they come from funny places. So I have what I call light bulb moments, where I will be talking to somebody, or I'll read an article, or I'll listen to somebody, and I'll just literally get a little ping in my head, and it's like there's a story there, and I won't know what that story is or how it's going to fit into, you know, what it ends up fitting into. But The Dark Room, for instance, I have a friend who's a printer in London, and he had printed some hairs running across a map. He likes printing things on things, and he had all these old maps, and he'd printed this series of hairs running across, and I looked at it and I just had one of those like story moments of like, these are really interesting, there's something here, I don't know what it is, but they're really interesting. And then when I was in Cornwall in not last summer, because we've missed last summer, the summer before, I think 2019, I was sitting on a beach and minding my own business, daydreaming, and an image of a girl running across the beach came into my head. She had dark hair, and she was wearing green shorts, a little white running vest and trainers, and she was running across the beach I was on at low tide, and she had this German Shepherd dog running after her. And again, it's one of those light bulb moments. It's like, there's a story here. It's like daydreaming, I suppose, that it comes, and this literally image just came into my head. And I was sitting right opposite, it was not on the Helfer estuary, and so it's actually a river that goes into the sea, and I'm sitting right opposite this cottage that has a ruin in the garden, which is like a sort of small square tower. And in fact, I discovered it was the customs officers' jail, because this is an estuary, and they would have stopped the ships coming into Falmouth and Foul River, and obviously would have locked a few people up in this jail. I had no idea at the time. Anyway, so that was really interesting. Another light bulb moment. And then I went to see a friend of mine who has a pottery. She's a ceramicist, and she lives just up the hill from where I was sitting. And I'm going to show you one of her tiles now. And I went into her pottery, And I was actually going in to have a look at the kiln because we've been having a chat about crime writing, and she thought the kiln would be a really good place to get rid of a body. So this is the type of thing you do when you're a crime writer on holiday. But when I went in, I saw this, which is one of her tiles, which
Beautiful.
has the most amazing hair on it. And it has, she writes into the body of the animals that she does. And it says, when she believed in herself, miracles happened. And so that for me was literally a massive light bulb moment. So I had this girl in my head at that point. I'd been sitting opposite my tower, the hairs connected, the hair here and the hair that I'd seen in London. And I started thinking about what was going on. Who were these people? Who was this girl? What was her story? And I came up with this idea for a country house hotel called Hare's Landing, which is, and then the girl actually is Caroline, who's in the story, but in fact the dog belongs to Rachel. So it's one of those strange, when a story comes, when you get all the bits together, the elements, and then it's nearly like you have to wait for the story to arrive. Joseph O'Connor talks about characters sort of floating around above our heads as authors, waiting to land on people, and it's very much like that. You're sort of waiting for the story to develop.
And a similar question, so Sam, would be like, what do you think makes a good story as a writer?
For me, because I suppose for what I write, but for me, what I read as well, I want to learn something new when I'm reading. I want it to be sort of good think lit, so that it's challenging me, that there's a mystery there where I'm thinking, what's going on, and I'm hooked in, sort of intellectually hooked in. I'm there and I'm trying to solve the problem. I want to learn something new if I can. So if I can bring something to a story, or if I can read something, maybe it's a bit of forensics. Or you remember the Patricia Cornwell books? I love those. The first one, Postmortem, was huge because it was the first time we really saw inside a pathologist's mortuary. And wow, I just was reading the opening chapter of that the other day. And so that knowledge is great. I want to learn a bit more. But I think it's all about plot. It's about being gripped. It's about having great cliffhangers at the end of chapters so you feel you need to read on, and being sucked into the story so that you live it with the characters. That's really, really important.
And like, how do you balance like making demands on the reader versus like where you might want to go? Like, do you kind of like to direct the reader with the story, or do you kind of like to make it a bit more cryptic?
Well, I think one of the things with crime is you have to master the art of misdirection with crime. So you'll have something going on over here, which is the key sort of point, the bit that's hidden, and then something nice and shiny happening over here. So the reader's looking over here, but actually the clues are all over here. And so that what you want to happen, particularly I want to happen with my books, is that by the time you get to the end, you don't see the twists coming, hopefully, and you get to the end and you're surprised and you feel satisfied that you've had a great read. But then when you go back and think about it, you think, oh God, yeah, there was that thing there and there was that thing there, and they were the clues that were laid sort of through the story, so that actually you are on the inside track, if you like.
And when you start out the process of writing the new book, do you know what the ending is when you're starting to write it, or does that? Because different writers seem to differ on that. Like, I know I was listening to an interview with Michael Connolly recently, and he seems to know before he starts how the book's going to end. Whereas with yourself, would you be similar? Or?
Yeah, I'm a bit of a plotter and a planner, so I like to know what's going to happen through the book. Now, and I feel much more comfortable if I've got the end scene in my head. Now, the end scene can change, or I might not quite know what happens or why, but I have a picture in my head. So in the dark room, I had a picture. I can't tell you what it is because it's a big spoiler, but something very big happens at the end of the dark room, and it was that scene I had in my head. It pulls actually the dark room. When I was literally sitting on the beach in Helford Passage, I was only a couple of 100 yards away from Frenchman's Creek, and Daphne du Maurier is a huge influence on me. I adore Rebecca, and so there's lots of Rebecca threads running through the dark room. For you guys, if you've read Rebecca and you love it, then you'll spot them. And so there was a bit of a Rebecca-esque bit in it, and I knew that's where I wanted to end up, but I didn't know how it happened or why it happened or what the results were. So it was really when you write to that point, then you discover it. The characters really do show you the way. It's really strange. Sometimes you sit down and you sort of know what you're going to write, you know roughly where you're going, but when you start writing, the words just start flowing, and that's the characters doing all the work for you.
And then in terms of research for your book, like, would you interview people to kind of find out the ways and means of people working in, let's say, policing or forensic? Or
yeah. Yeah, so I'm a real stickler for detail. I want to make sure my details are absolutely bang on and correct. So certainly in the Cat Connolly books, which are the police procedurals, the police procedure is right. And I make sure this new crime series I'm doing is all about forensics, so I'm making sure that that's all right too. And the same with the Darkroom. Yeah, that actually I also have a copy editor who checks me in absolutely minute detail. So in the Darkroom, Rachel leaves London and gets the ferry to Rosslare, I think, and then she drives from Rosslare to West Cork, and literally I've made sure that that journey can be done in that time, at that time of day, made sure the ferry will arrive at the right time, all of that details, because I don't want somebody to be jerked out by the story by a mistake that I've made. So, you know, if you're a regular traveller from London to West Cork, and I'm sure there's lots of people out there who are, and you read the book, you don't want to be going, oh my goodness me, there's no way they do it in that time. You know, I want everything to work. So yeah, and if you're a police officer, I want you to be able to read Little Bones. I actually had a lovely email once from a police officer who was in a book group who'd read the Cat Connolly trilogy and said that he could see it felt like it was the job, you know, he could really see it, and that was a massive compliment, because I'd captured that sense of the culture.
And as you write today, like, are there any writers who kind of directly influence your writing?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many fantastic writers out there. I was talking to Linwood Barclay, I did an interview with him the other day. It doesn't even have to be in my genre. So Cecilia Ahern, who I'm talking to this afternoon, it's just an amazing writer. The ideas, the premises of her book are just incredible, her different books. So yeah, no, I'm always influenced, always reading, I want every book to be better than the last one. You know, and you're going on a journey as a writer, so that yeah, you're improving and giving the books more depth, I think. So crime can be quite, you can write a very fast-paced crime novel that doesn't get into any sort of literary detail or anything, but I love that literary detail, you know, the thing that Rebecca has, which is the multi-layers and the fantastic story and working on all sorts of different levels. That's really what I want to achieve. So that's what I'm always working towards with every book, try and make them better.
Generally, like, is there a particular book that you read that you wish you'd written?
Oh yeah, Rebecca, big time.
To our viewers.
Yeah, actually, I'll turn around now. Like, this is where everything falls off the shelf. Okay, so this is an unrehearsed moment. It's like Blue Peter. I collect Rebecca first editions. So that's the first edition of that's actually I think a 14th imprint of the first Rebecca. And this is still selling today. It's one of the biggest selling books of all time, I think, bar Agatha Christie and the Bible. That's an first American edition, different type of cover. And then obviously I've got my my reader copy, which is very battered there. So I know I love that. That is the pinnacle for me. It's the perfect book.
Fantastic. So coming back to your new book, Sam, The Dark Room, you published 5 books, I think. The first in 2016.
Yeah.
The Little Bones is the first one.
Yeah, Little Bones is the first one. Yeah, and there's 3.
Part of the Cat Connolly trilogy.
Yeah.
Whereas your new book, I think, is a standalone.
It is indeed. Yeah, yeah. And, what I'm doing is, Keep Your Eyes on Me is a standalone, and Dark Room is a standalone. But what I'm doing, I want to try and create a world. So if you've read the Cat Connolly books, you'll be familiar with elements in all the other books. And there are references to Cat Connolly and little subtle Easter eggs that if you're a reader that's come with me on the whole journey, then you'll see bits and recognise those as sort of little secrets for you. But if you haven't read any of the other books, it won't make any difference. You won't, won't affect you.
And can you give readers just a summary or an overview of the new book before you do?
So the Dark Room. So the Dark Room is set in West Cork in a country house hotel called Hare's Landing, and essentially it's about a homeless man called Alfie Bowes. That's where the story starts. I've actually just published the prologue and chapter 1 on my website this morning for Island Reads. So if anybody wants to dip in, you can have a look. It's at samblakebooks.com. So it's about Alfie Bowes, and we meet him in the prologue. And then we move on to Rachel Lambert, who is a film location scout, who's based in London. And her husband, or her partner, Hunter, has been doing a documentary about homelessness in London, and wants to find out why people are ended up on the street. And he can't get to the bottom of what happened to Alfie Bowes. And then something awful happens to Alfie Bowes, and Rachel really feels that she wants to find out what his story is. And she discovers that there's this link with this place called Hare's Landing. Rachel's Irish, and then between the jigs and the reels, her houseboat's broken into and Hunter's knocked off his bike. So she's a bit spooked about being in London, and she decides going to Hare's Landing would be a good idea. There's a double win there. So she goes off to Hare's Landing with her dog Jasper, who's an ex-police dog, and she meets a girl called Caroline Kelly there. Caroline Kelly is a New York crime reporter. Again, she's Irish, and she's having a really bad time in work and she just needs a break. It's January in New York. She's up to her neck in snow and she just wants to get away. So she finds this great deal in Hare's Landing in January, and she goes. And then when the two girls meet, they start to investigate Alfie Bowe's story. But when they get there, they discover actually the house has a whole lot of secrets of its own. There's a 30-year-old missing persons case, and the previous owner has died mysteriously. And there's some spooky bits in this story. So Caroline hears violins and she smells perfume and doors slam. And the spirits, I suppose, help guide us through the story. But what's really interesting, actually, I'll keep talking here. Sorry to keep on going. But what I found really interesting when I was writing it, I was about 2/3 of the way through the book when I discovered that actually hares have this huge significance in Irish mythology as messengers between worlds. And so I started writing the book and these spooky things had started happening. And I'd called it Hare's Landing with no concept of this at all. But then when I discovered about the hares, all of a sudden it starts to come together and you think, my goodness, this is what it's like, a spooky feeling of its own, this strange serendipity. So yeah, the hares are very significant.
We can't wait to read that. We have the book on order in the library already. So
fantastic.
Our patrons can look forward to reading that one. So Sam, do you want to do a small reading from?
Yeah, well, I'll read you the first little bit. I'll tell you what. How long do you want, David?
2 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever.
Okay, cool. So I'll read you a bit from this is the prologue of Dark Room. Show you what the cover looks like. There we go. And this is where we meet Alfie Bowes. So I'm not going to read you the whole prologue, just a little bit of it. Alfie's hand shook as he slipped the letter into the mouth of the postbox, his bitten nails black against the cream of the envelope. He hesitated, holding it on the cold cast iron lip, glancing behind him, checking the road again. The traffic was almost stationary, lights dazzling. He looked in the opposite direction, to the column of blazing red tail lights. Safe, for now. Above him, the ornate clock on the station tower clicked on, another minute. The letter was thick, his spidery handwriting spread across many more sheets than he'd expected. Once he'd made up his mind and he'd begun, the whole story had come out with detail he thought he'd forgotten. The smell of the car, the heat of the sun as they'd driven down from Dublin, the laughter. The roads had been so bad, winding and narrow, the tarmac potholed and loose, and no signposts. He didn't know how tourists found their way around the country at all. It was important to get the story right, exactly right. This could be his only chance. Things would spiral as soon as it was received, and everything would change. He'd ended up writing the last page in cramped letters, the ink beginning to fade as he squeezed his initials into the corner. AB, Alfie Bowes. It wasn't his name, but that's what they called him on the streets, and it had become part of him, like the violin he was named after, held firmly now under his arm. Still holding the letter poised to drop, he lifted his other hand, the carrier bag handle looped securely around his wrist, and shook back the tattered sleeve of his tweed overcoat. He looked at the illuminated dial of his watch as the minutes flicking past. He didn't know when the letter would arrive. Frank at the hostel had only had a second-class stamp, and he'd missed the post today, but it would get there eventually. And when it did, they'd know the whole story. They'd know what had happened.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Sam. I'll just ask any of our participants if they would like to ask any questions. I'll just put up the views here. If anyone has any questions, you can raise your hand or
just wave.
Loretta. Let's see. I'll try and unmute you there.
Yeah, it's the unmuting bit always takes ages, doesn't it?
Hi, Loretta.
Hi. Hi, David. Hi, you guys.
Hi.
Hi, Sam. What made you choose the detective thriller genre?
I think there's two reasons. First of all, again, I'm interested in mystery. But actually, do you know something? It's funny. When I first wrote Little Bones, I came up with the Little Bones. Sounds a bit grim now, but it's about somebody finding their bones of a baby hidden in the hem of a wedding dress. And when I first came up with the idea, I came up with the idea of the bones in the wedding dress, but I didn't know who found them. And I started writing. I suppose I'd written 2 or 3, probably 4 books. Little Bones was my 5th book. So I knew what I was doing, but I was sort of writing my way into the story to try and find out what it was about. And I knew it was about an artist called Zoe. And so I'd written a great long prologue about her, and I'd written about her mother and various things that happened to try and get it into the story. But it was only when I had got to that point that I realized that somebody needed to find the bones in order for there to be a story. And that's when Kat Connolly came into the picture. And then I had a police procedural, because obviously she was in the Guards. So there's a break-in Zoe's house in Little Bones, and Kat Connolly finds them. So yeah, I didn't actually set out to write a police procedural. I mean, I've read loads of them. I'm actually married to an ex-police officer too, which is a bonus. And I'm very interested in that whole detective, I suppose, genre. But actually, when I started, I didn't know it was going to be a detective novel until Kat literally walked into the story.
And can I ask just real quick, could you talk about your writing journey, how you became a writer and how you became a professional writer, how you made that jump? You know?
Okay, so I started writing in 1999, a long time ago. My husband went sailing across the Atlantic for 8 weeks, and I had literally had an idea for a book, and I was writing. I'd been working in marketing. I'd done a history degree, been working in marketing, had been one of these people who, as I said earlier, who always thought that I would write something someday, and had this idea. So I had long dark evenings and lots of time to fill, and I started literally writing it longhand and then typing it up in the office at weekends. I didn't even have a computer then. And the bug bit me, literally. It was a case of, when you're writing and it's going well, you start writing at 12 o'clock and you look up at the clock and it's 4 o'clock and the time has just gone. So literally the bug bit. And I was completely convinced that was going to be an overnight, absolutely instant bestseller. I mean, had no question at all that this was genius. So I made all the rookie mistakes. I finished the manuscript, put the last full stop down and sent it out. And it was duly rejected everywhere, all over the world. But I realized then I kept writing, and I realized that I was loving it and I wanted to develop a story, and also that I needed to learn more about my writing. So what I actually did was I did a weekend workshop down in Dingle, a writer's workshop. And I really loved it. And I realized, yes, actually I could write. It helps to have a little bit of somebody telling you, actually, yeah, this is good. But I knew needed to learn a whole lot more. And I set up a company called Inkwell. So what I actually did was decided I wanted to do one-day workshops. I wanted to find out more about writing. I wanted to hear from best-selling authors, and there was nobody doing that in Ireland at the time. So I decided I'd set up my own. I was working in event management, so it wasn't a big leap for me. And it turned out that actually a lot of other people were in that boat too. And so we set up a series of one-day intensive fiction writing workshops that ran for a good few years and just were hugely successful. I had people coming from all over the place, UK and everywhere, to go to those, and learned so much because I was sitting through every single workshop. And even now, when I'm going to interview Cecilia Hearn this afternoon, I was talking to Linwood Barclay on Friday. There's a whole series actually on the writing.ie Facebook page of interviews with authors. Myself and my agent are both doing them. And I learned something new in every single one, because writing is constantly learning. I'm saying I want to make each book better. So I sat through loads and loads of workshops, but basically I just kept going and kept writing until I came up with the idea for Little Bones. And that was my breakout book. That was the high concept novel. And I found an agent by then. I'd made lots of contacts in publishing. I'd found an agent. I'd set up the writing.ie website as well. And so basically, I think I basically kicked on all the doors. I just kept pushing them open. And that's what worked for me.
Sam, can I ask you as well? One of our viewers, Paul, has asked, how did you first get published, and have you any tips on getting published?
Yeah, I've tons. Because now I work as a scout, so I work with a whole bunch of agents in London who are looking for manuscripts, and so through Inkwell we do things like readers' reports and stuff. But there is tons of stuff on writing.ie, so have a look at writing.ie. The most important thing is not to send a book out too soon. Make sure that it's really, really, really polished, that you have had as much feedback as you can possibly get, because the industry's changed a bit. When I first started, when I got to book 3, I'd met a fantastic editor called Tressa Cody, who ran Townhouse Country House. I'd actually invited her to talk at a lunch that I was organising, and I sent her that book and she really loved it. And she sent it out for what she was calling readers' reports, and readers were reading them and coming back then with the detail. That's when I realised I could write, but actually I really needed to learn a lot more. I can still remember those first readers' reports, and that was really, really, really useful. So that was something then I built on, and I've built into sort of the Inkwell model, but trying to make sure that the book is the best that it can be is really, really important. And actually the getting published part is as much work as writing the book, you know, having to write a really good synopsis, writing a good pitch for your story. One of the interviews we did on winning the writing game was with Andrew Miller, who's a Costa winner and book award winner. And he said, he really nailed it. He said, your story needs to be original and fresh. So for a breakout novel, for anybody who's writing and they want to, you know, and it's their debut, it's hard to understand that it might not be the first book that you write. Like for me, it was book 5, but you're learning your craft every time you write something new. Every word that goes down on the page, you're learning and honing your craft and getting better. But it needs to be original and fresh. That's really, really important.
Any more questions from anyone there?
Stun them all into silence now.
That's okay.
That's good. Margaret.
Oh, Margaret. Sorry, Margaret. I'm just gonna.
I love your pictures, Margaret. Aren't they lovely?
Margaret.
I think it's still on mute there.
Hello, Margaret.
There you
Can
go.
you hear me?
Yeah, we can now.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sam. I'd like to ask you about the presentations of the actual books and the book design, cover design. And are you Kat Connolly? They're similar, and I see in your new book has a different cover design. I'd like to know what your input is into covers and into titles.
Okay, so that's, yeah, interesting. Very good question. So there are 2 different publishers. The Bonnier was my first publisher, the Kat Connolly books, and the 2 standalones are with a different publisher. Generally, as an author, you have input into what you like. So usually you're presented with 4 or 5 different images, and then you can choose which one you like. But it's not just you choosing, it's my PR people who are amazing here in Ireland would be involved. They're really good, and they work very closely with Eason, so Eason would have a big input. My agent would have an input, my editor would have an input. You know, there's a round circle of people, and so generally speaking, and they want a happy author. I mean, they want me to like it. So we're all trying to sort of work towards getting something that represents the book. The 3 Kat Connolly books, the first 3 covers, this one actually was funny, Little Bones, because when I only saw the image of it on the computer, and it didn't look like a nice orange at all, and I had a big fit because I really hated the orange, really big fit, and I ended up saying to my editor that I hated it, and it was this big conversation. Then I lost the internet. Anyway, I rang my agent and I said, you're going to have to sort this out. Anyway, between the jigs and the reels, by the time we walked into Waterstones for the launch of Little Bones, and there was this massive pile of books there, it was this beautiful zinging orange. It wasn't the awful colour that I'd seen on the computer at all. So yeah, you have to take that into account too. But no, they're great. I absolutely adore, this is my favourite cover of all of them. This one, the dark room, I absolutely adore that. And the house is so bizarre because they sent through 3 or 4 images, and the house wasn't quite the same as this on the first version of this cover, but this is one that everybody loved. And I went back to her and I said, the house isn't quite right. It was a single story and it just didn't look right at all. And she came back, and this house is actually almost identical to the house that's in my head, because it's based on a hotel in Falmouth called Merchant's Manor Hotel, Hare's Landing, and it's so like it, it's spooky. So I was like, oh my goodness me, that's one of those weird moments. Yeah, so I adore that one. So yeah, I have a certain amount, I have a lot of input, I think. In terms of titles can change hugely. Little Bones was called The Dressmaker for like 10 years, or however long it took, 5 years it took me to write it, for the whole time, and was going to be published as The Dressmaker. And then literally it was published in April, and I think the Christmas before, there's a movie called The Dressmaker came out, and my agent, I sat down, I remember sitting down with my agent in London and just having a big conversation about whether, you know, this was not a good thing, because this is my debut novel. You only get one chance to be a debut, and you don't want people to be Googling The Dressmaker and getting the movie and not the book. So we had a really good think, and then decided, yeah, it needs a new title. But coming up with that title was the most difficult thing, I think, that I've ever been involved in, because Alex Barkley's a good friend of mine. I was down in Waterford with her. We spent like 3 hours trying to come up with new titles. My agent, on the way back from Waterford, which is like a 2-hour journey, I was on the phone constantly to my agent to try to think of a new title. My publishers were trying to come up with a new title. And it seems so obvious when you've got it now, because it's such a brilliant title. But actually it was one of the directors of the publishing company suddenly had this moment and sent an email and said, how about Little Bones? And that was it. It was perfect. And it's perfect for the book. And it's brilliant. Yeah. So yeah, my agent was funny, because he always used to say that The Dressmaker sounded like a Regency romance to him, so he was quite pleased.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, well
Sam, I've
done.
one other question from Magda. She's wondering just how long does the process take from when you start writing a book to when it gets onto the shelves in the bookshops?
So it's quite a long process of drafting. I write quite quickly. So my first draft, which is really Dave Rudden, who's the great kids author, calls it the vomit draft, which isn't very attractive, but that's really what it is, like splurging the story onto the page. I do a lot of plotting and planning first, so I get that bit done. I have an idea of what's going to happen in each chapter, and I know my characters really well before I begin, so I do a lot of research on them and who they are and, you know, where they went to school and all that type of thing. So then I start with the first draft and I literally splurge it onto the page, and I can do that in usually about 3 months, 3 to 4 months. But then when I get to the end of that, I then go back to the very beginning, and on the screen, I'm going through and I'm editing and tidying it up and taking out the clunky sentences and all the repeated words and the bits that just don't make any sense. You know, the bits where somebody said something that hasn't happened yet, because that obviously I've got it in my head, and you know, these things can get out of sequence. So that happens next. Then I print off, hopefully a more polished version, and I read it in a printed form. And I get it spiral bound in the printers, and so I'm literally reading it like a book, and I'm there with my pen making changes. So that's the next draft, and then I go back into the document on the computer, make all those changes, and then I'll read it from beginning to end again on the screen. Then it will go to my agent, and he might have some changes to do, and then it'll go to my editor, and obviously then we start the editing process with her. So the whole process beginning to end is probably about six months. And then by the time you've built in then the marketing end and getting the cover right and everything, it's usually a year, and that's why there's a year between books. So you have a bit of time between, but yeah.
Well, if that answers your question, Magda. Is there anyone else there who may have a question for Sam before we finish? Okay.
I've just spotted Paul's image is a tarantula, but it's pink.
It's
That's great.
Something for your next book.
Absolutely. It's awesome.
Okay, Sam. So listen, thanks very much for joining us today as part of Ireland Reads. And of course, for our viewers, they can go to the Ireland Reads website for lots of suggestions and various book options to
absolutely. Books Ireland actually have just done a great article that's online if you Google it, which is talking to a whole load of different authors about what they're reading. So John Boyne's in there and a whole load of different people.
Oh,
there's masses of stuff. And if you want to read the start of The Dark Room, just pop over to my website at sambladebooks.com and you can read the opening chapters.
Well, thanks, Sam, and we wish you every success with your new book, The Dark Room. And thanks everyone for joining us today.
Thank you so much for asking me. I'm thrilled. Thank you. Thanks so much. Lovely to meet everybody.
Cheerio. Bye.
Thanks, Emil.
Brilliant questions.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Sam. Thank you.